There is a kind of loneliness that no one talks about. Not the loneliness of empty rooms or Friday nights with nowhere to go. Not the loneliness that announces itself and asks to be addressed, but the other kind, the loneliness that lives inside a full life, the loneliness of a man surrounded by colleagues and calendars and the constant noise of a world that needs things from him, who lies down at night and feels, underneath all of it, the quiet and persistent sense that something essential is missing. Theo had lived with this feeling for so long that he had stopped noticing it. The way you stop noticing the sound of traffic when you have lived near a busy road long enough. It was simply the texture of his life always present, never examined, filed somewhere under the category of things that would improve when things got better. Things were always about to get better. He was 34 years old, and he had achieved by every visible measure exactly what he had set out to achieve. The apartment was good. The title on his business card had grown longer each year in the way that titles do when people are advancing. He had a phone that buzzed with the frequency of someone whose time other people valued, and a schedule that left no gap large enough for the kind of thinking that might have been dangerous. He woke each morning already behind. Not behind on anything specific. There was no single thing he could have pointed to and said, "This is what I am late for." It was more like a general condition of lateness, a permanent awareness that somewhere the world was moving faster than he was moving, that something was being built or decided or claimed in the moment he was standing still. And that standing still, for even a moment, was a kind of loss he could not afford. So he ran. Not literally, though he did that too. In the early mornings before the day began its demands, he ran in the way that people run when they are afraid that stopping will reveal something they are not ready to see. And in all that running, in all those years of forward motion and accumulation and achievement, he never once looked down. His shadow had always been there. This is not a metaphor yet. It is simply the truth of physics. Wherever there is light and a body, there is a shadow. Theo's shadow had followed him through every room he had walked into, every street he had crossed, every moment of his adult life, but it had never been seen. Not really seen. Not the way you see something when you stop and look at it, and let its existence register in the part of you that responds to things. While Theo stood tall in bright conference rooms and felt the particular warmth of being recognized, his shadow was crushed beneath the feet of strangers, pressed flat against cold corporate floors. While he ran through rain toward shelter, it was dragged through puddles, scattered across wet pavement, left behind in places he never looked back at. It followed him anyway. Through every disappointment he refused to acknowledge, through every victory that felt, by morning, like not quite enough, through the years of silences at dinner tables with people who had known him when he was simpler, before the running started, through the nights when the apartment was so quiet that the refrigerator's hum became the loudest thing in his world, it was always there. And it had never asked for anything. Only, sometimes, in that particular quality of late afternoon light, when shadows grow long and lean across the ground, it seemed to reach towards something, a kind of extension, a yearning in the geometry of it, as if the shadow, pressed so long against the earth, was trying to say something that had no language. Just once, let me be noticed. The evening everything changed, was unremarkable in every way except that it was raining. The kind of rain that falls slowly and deliberately, as if it has somewhere to be but is in no hurry to arrive. The kind that settles over a city and makes it quieter than it usually allows itself to be, and in that quiet, makes it possible to hear things that the noise usually covers. Theo was late. He was always late for something. But this evening the lateness felt heavier than usual, weighted by a meeting that had gone wrong, and a conversation he had avoided, and the particular exhaustion of having spent an entire day being exactly the person other people needed him to be. He stood under a dim street lamp on the corner of a street he had walked 100 times without seeing, his briefcase in his hand, and felt for reasons he could not have explained that he did not want to move. The briefcase fell. He let it. For the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, Theo stood still. Not the enforced stillness of a meeting or a commute or a moment between tasks. Real stillness. The kind that comes from simply stopping, without agenda, without destination, just a man and the rain and the lamplight and the city going about its business around him. He breathed, and then something felt wrong. He lifted his hand, a small automatic gesture, the kind of thing you do without thinking, and looked at it. And then he looked down. His shadow was not moving. This is the moment that is impossible to explain to someone who has not experienced it, and completely unnecessary to explain to someone who has. It was not frightening exactly. It was stranger than frightening. His shadow stood slightly apart from him, no longer following, no longer copying, just existing, in its own stillness, with its own weight. And in that stillness, Theo saw something he was not prepared to see. The shadow looked tired. Not tired the way Theo was tired, which was the tiredness of someone who had asked too much of themselves. This was a different kind of tiredness. The tiredness of something that had given everything it had, consistently, without recognition, for years, and had never once been asked whether it was all right. Something in Theo's chest moved. He had spent years feeling alone in rooms full of people. He had built an entire interior life around the assumption that no one truly understood him, that the connection he felt with others was always slightly less than what he needed it to be, that there was a gap between himself and everything else that no amount of achievement could close. And here, beneath him, in the rain, was the evidence that he had been wrong. Something had always been there. Through every moment of his life, through the bright ones and the dark ones and the ordinary ones that made up most of it, something had been present with him, faithful and wordless and completely undemanding. He had never once noticed. "I didn't know," he said. The words came out quietly, the way words come out when they are true, not performed, not arranged, just released. "I didn't know you were there." The shadow said nothing. It didn't need to. Theo knelt down on the wet pavement, the rain soaking through his trousers, and looked at the shape of his own shadow on the ground. He thought about his mother, who called every Sunday morning and always asked the same questions in the same gentle order, and never once complained when he answered briefly, because she understood that he was busy, and she had decided long ago that his busyness was not a rejection of her, even on the days when it was. He thought about his friend Marcus, who had been listening to Theo's problems for 15 years, and offering the kind of quiet, steady counsel that requires a person to consistently put someone else's concerns before their own. Theo could not remember the last time he had asked Marcus how he was. He could not remember the last time Marcus's answer would have been the first thing on his mind when he left their meetings, rather than the relief of having been heard. He thought about his colleague Elena, who stayed late without being asked on the days when the work was overwhelming, who left coffee on his desk on mornings when she sensed he was struggling, who had done these things for years without being thanked in any way that matched what they cost her. These were his shadows. Not the metaphorical shadow on the pavement, though that too, but the actual people who had followed him through his life, faithful and present and consistently unacknowledged, who had given their attention and their time and their care to a man who was always looking forward, always running towards something, never looking down. "I'm sorry," he said, to the shadow on the pavement, to his mother, to Marcus, to Elena, to everyone who had stayed. "I was so busy chasing everything that I forgot what was already with me." The rain fell. The shadow did not move. But something in the whole silent arrangement of the moment felt lighter, as if being seen, even by one person, even just once, had taken a weight from the air that had been there for a very long time. He did not transform that night. This is important to say because the stories we tell about change are almost always stories about transformation. A single moment in the rain that rewrites a person completely, after which everything is different, and the old way of living becomes simply a memory of someone they used to be. That is not what happened to Theo. What happened was smaller and more durable than transformation. He began to notice things, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, with the uneven, imperfect attention of someone learning a new kind of seeing. He began to notice the people who had always been there. His mother's voice on Sunday mornings, the particular love in the repetition of her questions, Marcus's steadiness across 15 years of Theo's problems, and Marcus's quiet, uncomplaining loyalty in the face of Theo's inattention, Elena's coffee, on the difficult mornings. The unnamed woman at the building's reception desk, who always said his name when he arrived, who had been saying his name for 6 years, who was perhaps the most consistent source of acknowledgement in his daily life. He began to say thank you. Not the reflexive, automatic thank you that people exchange as social currency, but the actual kind, the kind that requires stopping for a moment and looking at the person you are thanking and meaning it. He called his mother one Tuesday afternoon, not because it was Sunday, not because she had called him first, just because he thought of her and realized that thinking of her was a reason to call. She was surprised. She was pleased. She talked for 20 minutes about her garden and a book she was reading, and a neighbor whose name Theo didn't recognize. He listened to all of it. He did not check his phone. When they said goodbye, she said, "I love you." And he said it back, and he meant it in the present tense, actively, as something he was choosing to say rather than something the situation required. He held the phone for a moment after she hung up, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, something that was not the absence of loneliness, but its opposite. Here is what Theo learned, slowly and imperfectly, in the months that followed that evening in the rain. Loneliness is not always about having no one. Sometimes it comes from ignoring the ones who are always there, from running so hard towards something you are certain will complete you that you trample, without noticing, the people who have been quietly completing you all along. The ones who matter most are rarely the loudest ones. They are not the people who demand your attention or make themselves impossible to overlook. They are the ones who stay in the background, who show up without being asked, who find ways to support you without requiring you to acknowledge the support, who would go on supporting you, faithfully and without complaint, until the day they were simply gone. And they do go. Not always in the dramatic way. Sometimes they just slowly fade, fewer calls, shorter messages, a gradual recession from your life that you don't notice until the space they filled becomes an absence large enough to feel. And then one day, the room is quieter than it should be, and you realize that someone was holding something together, and you never said thank you, and now the window for saying it has closed in the way that windows close, not with a slam, but with a slow and almost imperceptible settling into the frame. This is not a tragedy that happens to other people. It is the quiet, ongoing cost of running without looking down. Theo still moved forward. This too is important. The lesson was not to stop. It was not to trade ambition for stillness or achievement for attention. The world still needed things from him, and he still found meaning in answering those needs. But he moved differently now. He moved like someone who knew that the people beside him, and behind him, and quietly beneath him, were not scenery, not the supporting cast of a story whose protagonist was his own success. They were the story. They were what made the forward motion mean something rather than simply accumulate. And sometimes, when the light fell just right, that late afternoon light that stretches shadows long and lean across the ground, he would stop for a moment and look down, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, just to see, just to acknowledge, just to let whatever was there know that it was not invisible, because he had learned, finally, what it costs to be unseen, and what it means, the simple, profound, unrepeatable gift of it, to be finally noticed by the one person whose noticing you have been waiting for. Before you close this and move on to the next thing, Before the world reclaims your attention with its noise and its demands, and its endless supply of things that feel urgent, take 30 seconds. Think of your shadows, the people who have been there without asking to be acknowledged, the ones who call when they sense you are struggling, who stay when staying is inconvenient, who have given you more than you have given back, and who have done it so quietly that you have been able to pretend, without quite meaning to, that it costs them nothing. You still have time to look down. You still have time to say, I see you. I have always seen you. I was just running too fast to stop and say so. Do not wait until stopping is the only thing left to do. Because the people who stay without asking, the ones who love you in the background while you are busy shining in the light, they are not permanent. No one is permanent. And the window for saying thank you is open right now, in this moment, in a way that it may not always be. Look down. See your shadows. Tell them what they mean to you before the light changes and the chance is gone.